yeehaw, we went with yeehaw. You've got a nerdy Scottish-American host who has never done yeehaw outside of a cowboy-themed restaurant, and we went with yeehaw for the intro. Right, well, anyway, welcome to the Tab Roundup, breaking down the news stories that actually matter and quashing the endless drone misinformation from Russian bots and NASCAR-watching uncles. Tonight on Tab, we've got a preview of what it looks like when a government stops pretending it's about governing and just openly starts running on a I want it that way doctrine. We've got James Comey indicted, Jimmy Kimmel suspended, and generals being summoned like Hogwarts students to a defense against the dark arts class. Not to mention Trump suing the New York Times with a document so long it could double as an IKEA manual. And given Trump's mastery of the English language, I'm pretty sure it's just as confusing. Snot-ruffling is right. Snot-ruffling. Snot-ruffling. You get my point. These stories may sound separate, but the problem is they're not. They're part of one big theme, which is power is being used less like a tool to enforce the civil and legal norms and more like a weapon. And if you missed it, don't worry. That was the goal for you to miss it. Authoritarianism isn't built in a day. It's built in meetings no one asked for and lawsuits no one reads. All right, let's start with James Comey. Remember him? The tall guy, the FBI who managed to make both parties hate him at the same time, but for different reasons? It's actually kind of impressive. It's like getting booed at both a Yankees and a Red Sox game. Well, Comey has just been indicted for allegedly lying to Congress in his 2020 testimony. Now, indictments are something that's supposed to be a serious thing. A grand jury indictment is when the DOJ secretly assembles 16 citizens, they present a case to them, and they have them vote on if there is sufficient reasonable cause to bring those charges to court. Now, it's important to note that this is not a conviction. It's not a guilty verdict. They only get to vote on the information presented to them by one side, prosecutor, to decide if the case can proceed to an actual legal proceeding. But now we come to the fun part, which is that Trump's been pushing for Comey to get indicted for a really long time. This was even something that Trump had pressured Bill Barr to do in his last administration. And even Bill Barr, a man who looks like a villain in a movie about talking rabbits, refused, saying there wasn't valid grounds to pursue Comey. Now, most recently, Eric Siebert was serving as the U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, where these charges were brought. But he was forced out for, quote, resisting politically sensitive prosecutions due to a lack of evidence, which seems like a pretty damn good reason to resist. This led Trump to remove him and post the weird public tweet seeming to pressure Pam Bondi to have somebody indict Comey. So this is why it's important that we have career prosecutors confirmed by the Senate and not just unilaterally appointed. They tend to have some standards even when they're MAGA appointees because they care about their job. But here's where we run into a problem. Because the president can appoint an interim U.S. attorney to serve for up to 120 days without a Senate confirmation. And that was the case for Siebert. But now Trump has appointed another interim replacement, which is legally dubious to begin with, and it's former Miss Colorado Lindsay Halligan, who graduated from the Miami School of Law in 2013, worked as a junior in insurance sales, then worked as a White House secretary, and get this, was the person who reviewed the content at the Smithsonian to decide what woke stuff Trump should have removed. So I'm sure that the next exhibit there will just be about how Trump created the world in 4 days, and it was a huge success. At the end of the day, Halligan is not a career prosecutor. She is a Trump loyalist with a questionable law degree. And that's probably why legal commentators, both Democrat and Republican, have called her indictment weak, light on the details, and, quote, the shortest and vaguest document in the history of law. In fact, I can fit the entire text on screen. It basically says he made a false statement and obstructed justice, and it was false because he knew otherwise. It presents no evidence and is basically thought crime, but that's not unusual for Trump. Just like in his New York Times lawsuit, he doesn't want these cases to go to court because when they do, he loses. We still have some semblance of a judiciary in this country. He wants settlements, he wants headlines, and he wants loyalty through fear. Now, speaking of grudges, 2 weeks ago, Trump also filed a $15 billion lawsuit against the New York Times, which is less of a lawsuit and more Elon failed investment kind of scale. The judge took one look at the filing, all 85 pages of it, and basically said, what the hell is this? This is not a lawsuit. This is a diary of delusions of grandeur. He dismissed it and told Trump's lawyers, hey, file it again, keep it under 40 pages next time. And honestly, thank God, because it read like the most absurd teenage Wattpad fanfiction you have ever heard. It's like a story about Lord of the Rings, but with Aragorn and Legolas making out halfway through, which I kid you not, is a Wattpad category with more than 25 full books written, with many of them having been read more than 50,000 times. Maybe the internet was a mistake. Now, to the lawsuit, it went as far to say the true and accurate statements, quote, damage President Trump's hard-earned world-renowned reputation for business success, his decades of magnificent real estate achievements, and how his sweet, generous charisma and unique business acumen represent a cultural magnitude of his singular brilliance and capture the zeitgeist of our time. I assume they ran out of space to say, and when dear leader descended from the heavens, he birthed all of civilization by wiping away his sneeze on the feather of a dove, for we are just mere snot-born mortal stills compared to his singular brilliance. Anyway, needless to say, this case got dismissed, especially because in the 85 pages, the lawyers somehow didn't reference a single statute actually related to slander or libel, which shows how Trump is trying to use the law as a cudgel for settlements and talking points, not actual legal cases. And then there's Jimmy Kimmel, late-night comedian, occasional Oscar host, and now apparently SWAT enemy of the state. Kimmel told a joke after the Kirk assassination that was about how Trump clearly didn't give a shit because he was busy talking about his ballroom. And suddenly, the FCC chair, a Trump appointee, went on a full-on moral panic, calling Kimmel's monologue sick and suggesting regulatory action. Within hours, ABC had suspended his show, and Maddox quickly came to the defense of the action, saying it was because the show was losing money, and Kimmel's ratings were tanking, and the FCC rules prevented this profane topic, or that it was Disney themselves who wanted the show to end, and they were looking for an excuse. Of course, as it turns out, none of that is true. Instead, local affiliates like Nexstar and Sinclair, who broadcast Disney's ABC shows locally, pulled Kimmel from their broadcasts, meaning ABC wasn't getting any revenue for the show during that time and put it on a hiatus for review. Sinclair is a right-leaning network that is still majorly owned and operated by a single family, even though it's publicly traded. Their CEO has long praised Trump's conservative ideology and said that Sinclair is, quote, here to deliver your message. Wait, they pulled Kimmel's show and said that it won't return until Kimmel makes a donation to Kirk's charity and formal apology. As for Nexstar, well, they have a $6 billion merger before the FCC right now, where they're trying to take over their largest competitor, Tenga. The problem is that would put them above the threshold for local broadcast distribution that the FCC expressly disallows in its anti-competition laws. So it's something that no reasonable FCC chair would ever approve. Of course, luckily for Nexstar, we don't have a reasonable FCC chair. We have Brendan Carr, who went on the Benny Johnson podcast. Yes, the same Benny Johnson who was found to have taken millions of dollars in Russian money to spread Kremlin propaganda. He still somehow has a show. Anyway, Carr went on Johnson's show and threatened the FCC licensed affiliates Nexstar and Sinclair about Kimmel's show and said, quote, we can do this the easy way or the hard way.
I've been very clear. They have a license granted by us at the FCC, and that comes with it an obligation to operate in the public interest. And we can get into some ways that we've been trying to reinvigorate the public interest and some changes that we've seen. But frankly, when you see stuff like this, I mean, look, we can do this the easy way or the hard way.
And that's why this is dangerous, because the cartoon villain vibes worked. Disney yanked him and affiliates stopped airing him. And it wasn't until there was public outcry that it changed. If Disney didn't like something that was said, they can pull Kimmel's contract at any time. They have those clauses. That mouse knows how to write a contract. But when a government uses tools to coerce that decision, that is literally what the First Amendment is there to prevent. Your dissent against a government cannot be infringed by that government. But of course, Trump's a bitch, and so his delicate little ego can't take being called out. Lastly, over the Pentagon, things are getting weird. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has ordered hundreds of generals and admirals, literally almost the entire senior brass from all over the world, to leave their posts and report to a meeting at Quantico. No agenda, no explanation, just show up. I'm sorry, what? You don't call the entire military leadership for a mystery meeting unless you're planning a loyalty test or a surprise birthday for Trump. And let's be honest, if it was a birthday party, he would fire half of those generals for refusing to sing happy birthday with enough enthusiasm. Hegseth has already cut more than 20% of 4-star positions and pushed out people who weren't sufficiently deferential, leaving our military lacking expertise. So when you gather everyone, like this for a meeting, it's not a meeting, it's intimidation theater. Imagine you worked at a big global company and your boss says everybody needs to come in to the main meeting room at headquarters tomorrow. No, I won't tell you why, just be there. You would assume that you are either about to be fired or that you're joining a cult. And either way, you're gonna update your resume. But to make matters worse, we are somehow telegraphing to the world that all of our senior leadership and military from every theater will be away from their posts at a known time and in one publicly known location. It is a national security nightmare that has no precedent in history. The closest is when in July of 1935, Hitler combined the offices of the presidency and the chancellorship into the office of the Führer and required new oaths pledging allegiance to him. Some of those first oaths were done en masse, but they weren't summoned all at once because even Hitler wasn't dumb enough to put all of his senior military leaders in one place at the same time, let alone to try and demand a loyalty oath from a few hundred armed, highly trained, highly respected men at the same time. Because surely no one could be that dumb, right? Right? But that's the problem with fascism. It creeps slowly, and so you often don't have a single moment which galvanizes people to stand up and fight. Rights slowly creep away, and governments don't tend to give back the rights they have taken. 9/11 was 24 years ago, and we're still using the Patriot Act to surveil Americans. Rights don't come back. The roundup each week has a lot of heavy stuff, and so we try and end on a good note, something positive or hopeful or inspiring to add a spoonful of sugar to the inevitable shit sandwich of the life under the Trump regime. And this week, it's Ted Cruz. Yeah, Ted Cruz. The dad bod version of a Cancun vacation Ken doll, the Turkish hair transplant Nosferatu, the before picture of the Sesame Street Counts Ozempic campaign, and an answer to the question, what if a chinchilla had gender-affirming care? Ted Cruz, of all people, actually called out the FCC overreach, calling it dangerous and comparing Brandon Carr to a mob boss.
And I got to say, that's right out of Goodfellas. That's right out of a mafioso coming into a bar going, nice bar you have here. It'd be a shame if something happened to it.
Now, setting aside that was the worst impression of all time, here's what should give you a little hope. People saw Trump's brazen overreach. People stood up. They put pressure on Disney and ABC, who brought back the show, and they saw a brazen attempt at censorship. But it wasn't just Democrats this time. While Cruz went on to talk about the dangers here to conservative media under future left-wing presidents, at least some on the right have had this rare moment of clarity in seeing where this slippery slope takes us. As I said, authoritarianism creeps slowly. It happens in boring paperwork, in headlines, and sound bites, bit by bit, and so many of them with such small stature that it's impossible for a divided public to galvanize around any one point. There are so many little things to be angry about that you cannot possibly unite because by the time the anger builds on one, there are 5 more that have happened and no one can agree what matters the most. And the saving grace of this presidency is that Trump might be one of the dumbest, most bipolar, most sensitive, ego-driven dictators of all time. And the ineptitude of this administration leaves a patchwork of mistakes and leads to repeated overreach. And it is that overreach, while scary, it is enough to shock the system. It is enough to make people stand up, to push back and say, hey, this is dangerous. It's enough for people to unsubscribe to Hulu. It's enough to make people protest, and it is enough to make one of the most spineless senators, a man who so clearly just wants to be a little theater boy, it made that coward stand up and say, hey, maybe we shouldn't do this. And that can remind you, we will get through all of this. Because if you can get Ted Cruz to do something other than go on an emergency vacation, then you can easily get good, democracy-loving, everyday people to resist enough to defend the ideal of a republic if you can.